Okay, I might as well show you sort of turn by turn now as the battle progresses. So this female tank here has climbed up onto the railway line and is now within machine gun range of this naval artillery here, but hasn't managed to hit them. And the naval artillery has managed to unlimber and has fired on the male tank and hasn't managed to hit that. And equally, the male tank has been firing on the armoured car, and the armoured car has been returning fire, and neither have scored a hit. So the situation there is still the same. There's some white infantry now occupying the railway station, and same kind of theme repeating itself, that the whites are getting really good command rolls and really moving up speedily, and the Russians failed just about all their orders and haven't advanced at all. And in the meantime, it was the third turn on the table for the final white fighter pilot, and he strafed the Checker company again with devastating effect, really high dice roll, and they've routed off the table. The fighter's really effective in strafing the advances. The army came over that open ground, and the whites over here again making good advance. So in the next turn now, they will be, I'm pretty sure they'll be within range of this machine gun, and they're going to be slowed a little bit by, I'm describing this field as rough ground, so that will slow their advance a little bit, so they might come under a bit of a threat there. And yeah, so on with the next turn. Yeah, I should have pointed out as well that the second armoured car there has been destroyed by fire from the armoured train, so they're no longer a threat in the centre of the table there. They're a bit exposed. I brought them a little bit too far forward. Another turnover, and armies are getting closer and closer. Sort of long range fire is taking effect still. This machine gun company here managed to wipe out the crew of that piece of artillery, and this female tank's still moving along the railway line and managed to inflict a terror marker on the crew of that gun. So the Reds are down to one artillery piece, and then all the artillery, which is pretty significant that they have left, is on this train. And over here, this machine gun has opened up on the coloured infantry, on the white infantry there, and inflicted two terror markers on the front company, and these guys have now stalled because they failed their orders, but the officer was trying to get the cavalry to come to the front because it could move more rapidly over this rough ground and charge the Reds, but failed the order. So they're stalled there, taking machine gun fire at the moment. These chaps will probably take up position behind this fence to give them a bit of cover and be able to fire on them. I think that's it to date. Right, well, only the front gun on this train has got a target within range at the moment. All these other rear guns, that was about the extent of their range, so they haven't got a target at the moment. and the front guns failing miserably to hit anything, whereas the White Russian tanks have now destroyed that artillery piece, and they're laying down machine gun fire on these troops here from the female tank. And I should have pointed out before that this white company in the station were driven out of the station by machine gun fire, but they've managed to enter it again, and I think the troops here decided to halt and receive the advance of the Russians, because the artillery here is going to lay down a massive kind of bombardment as these troops approach. So not looking too good for the Reds. But over this side, yeah, they blundered there, but luckily what didn't affect them too badly. And over here the machine gun has managed to drive one company backwards, whereas they failed their orders again over here. So this is certainly the best side, I would say, for the Reds, but it's not looking too good for them. Right, so the cavalry here are finally advancing, and they've got in front of the infantry now, and they're going to cross as quickly as they can across the rough ground here and try and charge the machine gun and the infantry there. That company excuse me, of Chaka aren't on the roof, they've actually entered the building. And these infantry as well are on their way finally, and they're actually in range of the artillery on the hill here, but it's long range, so the artillery fires had no effect on them so far, and they're going to be in trouble from these machine guns as well shortly. There's another building now that's been destroyed. That was the fault of the Reds this time, because there was no viable target for these guns on the train other than the buildings, so the Red officer decided he'd deny shelter to the Whites as they advanced by destroying the building. This carriage at the front, car at the front now, has taken 3 hits, so that is now knocked out. It's not destroyed, but the guns in it don't operate any longer. The machine guns from this tank and the artillery there, which is now unlimbered and deployed, have wiped out another unit over here. They've destroyed a machine gun company of the sailors, and they've also forced one of those units back, but in retaliation this company here has been driven out of the building once again by machine gun fire, and yeah, it was that tank that actually scored the final hit on the on the car there. Oh, and I've decided I am sort of winging this a little bit, so as this tank in particular got further and further away from its nominal commander, it occurred to me that it would be sensible to give this the Marauders, I think it's Marauders, rule from black powder, so that you don't pay a penalty for increasing distance. So in order for this commander to be able to control this tank, and this one, if the matter arose, then he can do so just on his command factor without paying an increasingly difficult penalty for the distance that the tank's making away from him. That seems to make sense, because the tank would once it got inside the enemy lines, it would be sort of self-motivating, really. So it would be doing things under its own initiative. And yeah, I think probably we are going to see some small arms fire in this game eventually, but all the casualties and all the damage so far has been done by machine gun fire and artillery fire and planes and so on. But there is going to be a little bit of rifle fire happening soon, I would imagine. I think that's everything for this turn. So did I point out? I'm not sure if I can't remember. But the final piece of artillery there has been destroyed as well. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. Yeah, so things not really looking good for the Reds, unless they can somehow start to move forward again with this train, so they can bring these other two guns into play. If they can bring the train up to about here, that would certainly worry the Whites. Right, I thought I'd just take the opportunity at this point. I'm halfway through the red side's turn at the moment. They've made all their commands, so for this I'm using the black powder structure. So all the commands have been issued, and now they're onto their shooting phase. That's totally unlike red actions rules, where you move a unit at a time and you can activate it to move or to shoot or to charge or whatever. In this I'm using, for the movements and the commands and so on, and the basic structure of the game, I'm using black powder. So I'm into the red players' shooting phase at the moment, and this is where I now incorporate the red action mechanics into the game, and show you how well it dovetails. So the red player, the Bolshevik side, can now fire on these white forces as they advance. And I started off with the machine gun. Okay, so here we've got the stats for the Bolshevik machine gun, and they have a fire factor of 18. So one platoon has a fire factor of 18, and they have a range. In the red actions rules that would be 32 inches, but I'm making it 32 centimetres. So they are within range of those cavalry. So you roll 2 dice and then you refer to a shooting table chart. So with a fire factor of 18, you would normally look at this column here, but the white cavalry have a skirmisher characteristic. Now what that means is, well, one of the effects of being a skirmisher is that it makes it harder for you to be hit by fire. So somewhere on here, I now can't find it. Oh yeah, here we are. Target of skirmishers -1 column. So what that means is that you go from the 17 to 24, because they had a fire factor of 18, you go down to that 7 to 16 column. You then roll 2 dice and you refer to the value, and I've already rolled the dice, and they inflicted 2 terror markers on the cavalry, which is what those 2 are there. Plus there's a star, which means that the white cavalry have to take what's called a serious rally check. So they have to roll 2 dice and roll below 7 in order to pass a sort of morale check, which they did successfully. So they stayed there just with 2 terror markers on them. Then, inside this building, so I'm measuring from the edge of the building to the cavalry, there is a company of Cheka. Okay, now each stand of checker, and each company can have up to 6 stands. This particular company has 4 stands, has a fire factor of 6. That means they have a combined fire factor of 24. So again, they would be firing on the white cavalry in that column there, and again they shifted 1 to the left, and they rolled particularly poorly and had no effect on them. So that is all the fire that they can inflict, because also here I have a company of Red Guard. Okay, so if you look at the differences in the characteristics of the Red Guard and the checker, each stand of Red Guard only has a fire factor of 4, so they have a less effective fire factor, but they also have a shorter range. So whereas the checker can fire at 18, the Red Guard can only fire at 12. That's not because they're using different weapons, they're using exactly the same rifles, but the Red Guard are more poorly trained, less accurate shots and so on. So the Red Actions incorporates into the rules by making their effective range shorter than that of the checker. So they are well out of range, but even had they been in that building in place of the checker, they wouldn't have been able to fire on the cavalry. And that really kind of encapsulates the mechanics of the rules, but it also shows how easy it is to join these two sets of rules together. So this is, I would say, this is quite a successful experiment. Anyway, on with the game. Right, so you've already seen the effect of the firing over here. Cavalry's managed to move a little bit further forward, and one of the infantry companies behind it has managed to move up a little bit, but not spectacularly. I've got to move that officer a bit further forward at the end of his turn, so I'll do that now. Over here, this red charge on the white lines is pretty heroic, but they're suffering a lot. They managed to get some hits on with rifle fire on this machine gun company, caused it to retire, but then it moved back in the white turn, but therefore, because it moved, it's not allowed to move and fire. Whereas this machine gun company inflicted a few, I think it inflicted 1 terror marker on it, and then the artillery fire from the hill over here is beginning to hit home, and they got another 2 terror markers and were forced to retire. So they failed a morale check, so they moved back a little bit. So that sort of stunted the charge a little bit, but see how they got on in the next turn. Over here, the train is underway now, so that means while it's moving, it can't fire its guns. It can fire its machine guns, but they're not in range or anything. Both this tank here and that artillery have been firing on the train, trying to hit the engine carriage now, because if they can do that with success, they might force the train to falter and think about reversing, going back up the track. And this female tank has just got off the railway line in time and was firing on a machine gun company there and forced it to retire. And I think that's about it for this turn. But it's certainly hotting up right the way along the line, really. Right, so end of another turn. What's been happening so far? Train still trundling along. I think I'll try and stop it about here. That would be perfect, and then I'll be firing into all that mass of white infantry there. The naval brigade voluntarily chose to try and pull back. They're being threatened by this tank armed with machine guns, which is safe from fire from the train for the moment because the train is moving, so they won't be firing. So they caused the machine gun company in particular to retire, and the infantry's trying to get into the wood out of the tank's way. Over here, this front of this assault's really being hammered now. They've got 5 terror tokens on them, so 2 more and that company will disappear, so I've got to try and rally those off in the next turn. And over here, the cavalry haven't managed to rally off their terror markers, but they did advance a short distance, so they're getting across that background, and the infantry is sort of keeping up with them. They move forward as well, but the fire from the machine gun and the chacker in the building weren't as effective this time. So there we go. It's not too late in the day, but the lighting is getting a little bit poor, so I think I'll carry on with the game tomorrow. So I'll call a halt to this part here, and there's more to come tomorrow.